after we select activity for a particular hour by using these select boxes, we already know that it is going to update activity ID property of timeline item objects that are initially declared within timeline items array of the root component. But now let's see what happens when we're going to remove one of the selected activities. So for example, let's try to remove coding activity. Let's go to activities page and remove first activity. And then switch back to timeline page, and the first select box shows reading activity as selected instead of coding. So the removed coding activity disappeared. But in fact, in Vue DevTools, within timeline items array, activity ID property of the first object still contains ID of the deleted activity. So we actually have to remove such activity IDs that were being deleted. Inside of timeline item component, when we select activity, it's gonna call select activity handler, and then it will fire custom event select activity to the timeline component. And when the timeline component will receive this event, it will fire another event with the name set timeline item activity to parent component, which is our root component. And in this handler set timeline item activity, we're going to assign ID of the selected activity to activity ID property of timeline item object. And when we try to remove some activity, delete activity handler gets called. So in this handler, besides removing activity from the activities array, we also have to go over all items within timeline items array by using for each loop. And within this closure, we're going to check if activities ID we're currently trying to remove is contained within one of the activity ID properties of timeline item object. In this case, we're going to reset activity ID since this activity will be removed. And there is no point to store IDs of deleted activities. So we're just going to do simple assignment of null value to this activity ID property, like so. And finally, let's test it out in the browser. So currently, first two objects of timeline items array have activity ID properties set to null. And now let's try to pick some activities for these 2 hours. For the first one, we'll choose coding, and for the second one, reading. And corresponding IDs were just assigned to activity ID properties of corresponding objects. And now, after removing one of these activities, for example, coding activity, if we take a look at the timeline page, we will see that the first select box still shows wrong activity, because after activity removal, all those select boxes that had removed activity as selected before should reset their values and show option by default. So in terms of UI, it's still not working as expected yet. But at least in Vue DevTools, activity ID property of the first timeline item object got null value. So from the data point of view, reset functionality works. And whenever we remove certain activities, if those activities were selected on the timeline page, their IDs will get reset within timeline item objects after activity removal. And we will be improving this behavior in the next lessons.